Rebecca had always been the person everyone could count on at Pine Ridge Community Church. For 15 long years, she showed up every Sunday morning at 7 sharp, keys jingling in her hand as she unlocked the heavy wooden doors. The smell of old hymnals and polished pews greeted her like an old friend. This was her world, her safe place, her everything. She wasn't just any church member. Rebecca ran the choir that made people cry during Christmas services. She taught Sunday school to kids who grew up calling her Miss Becca. When someone got sick, she organized meal trains. When families struggled, she quietly left groceries on their doorsteps. The pastor trusted her with the church keys. The budget committee sought her advice, and newcomers were always introduced to her first. If you wanted to know how things work around here, talk to Rebecca. People would say with genuine warmth. Her life followed a comfortable rhythm. Monday mornings meant counting Sunday's offering and preparing the deposit. Tuesday evenings were choir practice in the church basement, where she'd patiently work with voices that ranged from angelic to questionable. Wednesdays brought Bible study in her living room, where 8 to 10 women gathered around her coffee table, sharing prayers and homemade cookies. Sundays were her masterpiece. Everything had to be perfect. Rebecca lived alone in a small house 3 blocks from the church. She'd been married once briefly in her 20s, but that was ancient history now. At 42, she'd made peace with her single life. The church family filled the spaces that others might reserve for a husband and children. She found purpose in serving others, comfort in familiar routines. Then came the renovation project. The church building was nearly 80 years old, and age was showing in ways that couldn't be ignored anymore. The roof leaked during heavy rains, creating an embarrassing bucket symphony during services. The fellowship hall's floor sagged in places, making some members joke nervously about falling through to the basement. The heating system wheezed and coughed like an old man with lung problems. After months of fundraising fish fries, bake sales, and special collections, they finally had enough money to begin repairs. Pastor Williams announced they'd hired Crow Construction, a local company known for quality work and fair prices. Rebecca didn't think much about it until the first Monday morning when she arrived to find a pickup truck parked behind the building. Toolboxes and lumber were neatly stacked near the back entrance. She could hear someone moving around inside, the sound of work boots on wooden floors. When she pushed through the side door that led directly to her small office, she nearly collided with a tall man carrying a clipboard. He was Native American, probably in his late 30s, with calloused hands and kind eyes. His work shirt was clean but well worn, and he had that quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly what you're doing. "Sorry about that," he said, stepping back quickly. "I'm David Crowfeather. We're starting the roof work today." "Rebecca Martinez," she replied, extending her hand. "I help coordinate things around here." Something about the way he shook her, hand firm but gentle, respectful but not formal, stuck with her. Most contractors who worked on church projects were either overly familiar or treated the building like just another job. David seemed to understand he was in a sacred space. The following weeks, their paths crossed daily. Rebecca arrived early, David arrived earlier. She worked late preparing for events. He worked late to minimize disruption to church activities. They developed an easy routine of checking in with each other about schedules and access needs. "Will, you need the fellowship hall tomorrow evening?" she'd ask. "Not after 4, he'd reply. "Your Bible study group should be fine." These brief exchanges gradually grew longer. David would ask about upcoming services so he could plan noisy work during weekdays. Rebecca would update him on which areas needed to stay accessible for various church functions. Professional necessity became comfortable conversation. She learned that David had grown up on the Pine Ridge Reservation but now lived in town. He'd started his construction business 5 years earlier, building a solid reputation through careful work and honest dealing. He had a quiet way of talking about his craft that revealed deep pride in doing things right. Wood has its own personality. He told her one afternoon while replacing rotted boards in the fellowship hall, "You have to listen to it, work with it, not against it." Rebecca found herself looking forward to these conversations. David had a perspective on life that was different from anyone in her usual circle. He talked about respecting the materials you worked with, about understanding the history of old buildings, about the importance of creating things that would last beyond your own lifetime. "This church has seen a lot of life," he observed one day while examining the original support beams. "Baptisms, weddings, funerals, celebrations, heartbreak, you can feel it in the wood." She was surprised by how much she agreed with him. The building did hold memories, did have a spirit beyond just being a structure. She'd never heard anyone else express that feeling so clearly. Their coffee break started by accident. Rebecca always kept a pot brewing in the church kitchen, and one particularly cold morning she offered David a cup. He accepted gratefully, and they stood in the kitchen for 10 minutes talking about everything and nothing. It became a daily ritual. During these breaks, Rebecca discovered that David was nothing like what some church members quietly assumed about those people. He was educated, well-read, and thoughtful. He asked genuine questions about church life. Not from curiosity about strange customs, but from real interest in understanding what mattered to people. "Faith is important to my family, too," he told her one morning. "Different traditions, but the same heart." Rebecca began to see David as more than just the contractor. He was someone who listened when she talked about the challenges of managing church volunteers, who offered practical solutions when she worried about the building's ongoing maintenance needs, who made her laugh with gentle observations about human nature. The attraction crept up on her slowly, then hit like a summer thunderstorm. She found herself paying more attention to when his truck arrived each morning. She started timing her coffee breaks to coincide with his. She caught herself looking forward to Monday mornings again, but for entirely different reasons than before. David seemed to feel it too. Their conversations grew more personal. He talked about his grandmother's influence on his life, about the challenges of running a small business, about his dreams of expanding into historical restoration work. She shared stories about her students, her concerns about the church's future, her love for the community that had become her family. One evening in late summer, as David was finishing up some interior painting, Rebecca was preparing the sanctuary. For Sunday service, they worked in companionable silence, each focused on their tasks but aware of the other's presence. "Rebecca," David said finally, setting down his brush, "would you like to have dinner sometime? Away from here, I mean." Her heart jumped, but her mind immediately filled with complications. What would people think? How would it look? What would Pastor Williams say? What about the church board? But when she looked at David, standing in the soft light filtering through the stained glass windows, she realized something had already changed inside her. Somewhere between those first polite conversations and this moment, she'd fallen for this quiet, thoughtful man who treated her sacred space with reverence and treated her with a respect she'd rarely experienced. "I'd like that very much," she heard herself say. Neither of them could have predicted how much that simple yes would cost them both. Their first date happened on a Thursday evening at Miller's Diner, a small restaurant on the edge of town where the lighting was dim and the booths offered privacy. Rebecca had chosen Thursday specifically because it was the one night of the week when she didn't have church responsibilities and was least likely to run into congregation members. She told herself this caution was just being considerate, not wanting to create gossip or distraction. But deep down, she knew she was protecting something fragile and knew from judgment she wasn't ready to face. David arrived 5 minutes early, wearing a clean button-down shirt and jeans. He'd gotten a haircut, she noticed, and the gesture touched her more than expensive flowers might have. This mattered to him too. Over coffee and pie, they talked for 3 hours. Rebecca learned that David had studied engineering before choosing construction work, that he read poetry in his spare time, that he volunteered coaching basketball at the community center on weekends. David discovered that Rebecca had wanted to be a teacher but fell into church work by accident, that she painted watercolors as a hobby, that she worried constantly about doing right by people. "You care so much about everyone else," David observed gently. "Who takes care of you?" The question caught Rebecca off guard. She'd been taking care of herself for so long that the idea of being cared for felt foreign, almost dangerous in its appeal. Their relationship developed quietly over the following months. They met for dinner once a week, always at places outside the immediate church community. David would sometimes stop by Rebecca's house in the evenings, and they'd sit on her back porch talking until late. He was teaching her about Lakota history and traditions. While she shared stories about church life and her faith journey, Rebecca had never felt so understood by another person. David listened to her concerns about difficult church politics without trying to fix everything. He appreciated her dedication to her community while gently challenging some of her assumptions about the world beyond it. "You've lived your whole life in one small circle," he told her one evening as they walked through the town park. "There's so much more out there to discover." By winter, Rebecca knew she was in love. The realization scared and thrilled her in equal measure. At 42, she'd thought romantic love was behind her. David made her feel alive in ways she'd forgotten were possible. The pregnancy came as a complete shock. Rebecca stared at the test results in her bathroom at 6 in the morning, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the plastic stick. She was 42 years old, unmarried, and carrying the child of a Native American man in a community where such things simply didn't happen. At least, not to people like her. Her first call was to David. He came over immediately, finding her sitting at her kitchen table, still in her pajamas, staring at nothing. "Hey," he said softly, pulling a chair close to hers. "How are you feeling?" "Terrified," she whispered. "David, I don't know how to do this. I don't know what people will say. I don't know what's going to happen to everything I've built here." He took her hands in his. "We'll figure it out together, one step at a time." But Rebecca already knew that together might not be enough to weather what was coming. The first sign of trouble came from Lisa Chun, the church treasurer and Rebecca's closest friend in the congregation. Lisa had noticed Rebecca's frequent absences from their Wednesday Bible study, her pale complexion during morning services, her sudden aversion to the coffee she'd always loved. "Honey, are you feeling all right?" Lisa asked after service one Sunday. "You've seemed off lately." Rebecca managed to deflect the question, but she could see the concern in Lisa's eyes. Lisa was a good friend, but she was also a devoted church member who believed strongly in traditional values. Rebecca wasn't ready to test the limits of that friendship. The hiding became exhausting. Rebecca started wearing looser clothing and avoiding situations where people might notice changes in her behavior or appearance. She declined invitations to potluck dinners, claiming stomach problems. She stepped back from some of her leadership responsibilities, saying she needed to focus on other priorities. By her 4th month, the secret was becoming impossible to keep. Her body was changing in ways that loose sweaters couldn't completely disguise. Morning sickness had given way to a different kind of fatigue, and her emotions were unpredictable in ways that felt completely foreign. The confrontation came on. A cold February morning that Rebecca would remember for the rest of her life. Pastor Williams called her at home at 7:30. Asking if she could come in early for an important meeting. His voice was formal, lacking the warmth she was used to hearing from him. "Of course," Rebecca said, though something in his tone made her stomach clench with anxiety. When she arrived at the church, she found Pastor Williams waiting in his office, along with 3 board members: George Patterson, the board chairman, Martha Rodriguez, who'd been in the church for 30 years, and Tom Bradley, whose family had helped found the congregation. "Please sit down, Rebecca," Pastor Williams said. Gesturing to the chair across from his desk, the setup felt like a tribunal. Rebecca's hands grew cold as she realized this wasn't going to be a friendly chat about church business. "We need to discuss some concerns that have come to our attention," George began, his voice carefully neutral. "There have been observations about changes in your behavior and appearance over recent months." Rebecca's heart hammered against her ribs. "I'm not sure what you mean." Martha leaned forward, her expression kind but firm. "Dear, we've all noticed that you haven't been yourself lately. You've missed Bible studies, you've been less involved in planning activities, and frankly, some people are concerned about your health. And your relationship with the construction worker," Tom added bluntly. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Rebecca felt heat rise in her cheeks, part embarrassment and part anger at the dismissive way Tom referred to David. David Crow. Feather, she said clearly. His name is David Crow Feather. Pastor Williams cleared his throat. Rebecca, we understand that you're an adult who can make her own choices. But as leaders in this church, we have responsibilities to the congregation and to the example we set for others. What exactly are you asking me? Rebecca said, though she was beginning to understand where this was heading. George exchanged glances with the others before speaking. We think it would be best if you took some time away from your leadership positions. Just temporarily until you can sort out your personal situation. The euphemisms weren't fooling anyone. They knew about the pregnancy, or at least suspected it. They knew about David, and they decided that Rebecca no longer met their standards for church leadership. You're removing me from my positions because I'm pregnant, Rebecca said quietly. The silence that followed confirmed what she already knew. We're not judging you, Martha said quickly. We're just thinking about what's best for everyone involved. But Rebecca could see the judgment in their eyes, could hear it in their careful, disappointed tones. The woman who had given 15 years of her life to this church, who had organized countless events and comforted dozens of families, was now seen as a problem to be managed. I see, Rebecca said, standing up slowly. And David's contract? Another uncomfortable silence. That's a separate matter, Pastor Williams said. But his averted eyes told Rebecca everything she needed to know. She walked out of that office knowing her life as she'd known it was over. The community that had been her world, her family, her identity, had just politely but firmly shown her the door by the end of that week. David's construction contract had been terminated due to budget constraints. Rebecca had been quietly removed from all church communications lists. The Wednesday Bible study continued without her, and someone else took over choir duties. The silence was deafening. People she'd considered friends suddenly became busy when she approached. Phone calls went unreturned. Invitations stopped coming. Rebecca found herself completely alone, carrying a child whose father had also been cast out, wondering how everything she'd built over 15 years could disappear so quickly and quietly. The loneliness was suffocating, but the real pain came from the realization that her worth to these people had always been conditional. She'd spent years believing in their love and acceptance, only to discover it evaporated the moment she failed to meet their expectations. She was about to learn that sometimes losing everything you thought you had is the only way to find what you actually need. The isolation hit Rebecca harder than she'd expected. Days stretched endlessly when you had nowhere to go and no one to see. Her phone, once constantly buzzing with church business and friend updates, now sat silent on her kitchen counter for hours at a time. She was 7 months pregnant, showing clearly now, and the small town felt like it was closing in around her. Simple errands became exercises in avoiding eye contact and pretending not to notice whispered conversations that stopped when she walked by at the grocery store. Rebecca watched former friends study their shopping lists with sudden intensity when she approached. The cashier, Jenny Williams, who used to chat about her kids and church events, now processed Rebecca's items in uncomfortable silence. Have a good day, Jenny would mumble, not meeting her eyes. Rebecca began shopping at different times, driving to the next town over for supplies, anything to avoid the suffocating weight of judgment that seemed to follow her everywhere. David tried his best to support her, but he was dealing with his own challenges. Word had spread quickly through the construction community about why his church contract had ended. Some potential clients suddenly found reasons to go with other contractors. Others asked pointed questions about his reliability and character. It's not fair, Rebecca said one evening as they sat in her living room. You shouldn't have to pay for my choices. David took her hand gently. These aren't just your choices. This is our baby, our relationship, our life together. We're both responsible, and we're both dealing with the consequences. His calm acceptance of their situation helped, but Rebecca still felt guilty for dragging him into her complicated world. She'd been the one with community standing to lose. She'd been the one who should have known better. As the weeks passed, Rebecca's world shrank to just her house, David's visits, and necessary trips for medical appointments. The loneliness was crushing, but even worse was the growing realization that she'd built her entire identity around being needed by people who had dropped her the moment she became inconvenient. Then came the invitation that changed everything. David's grandmother, Elena Crowfeather, was celebrating her 75th birthday with a traditional feast and powwow on the Pine Ridge Reservation. David had mentioned it casually, not expecting Rebecca to be interested. "You should go," Rebecca said. "Don't miss family time because of me. I want you to come with me," David replied. "Grandmother has been asking to meet you." Rebecca's first instinct was panic. She'd lived just 30 miles from the reservation her entire life but had never actually set foot on native land. Her knowledge came from history books, movies, and the kind of secondhand stories that were probably more fiction than fact. "David, I don't think that's a good idea. I wouldn't know how to act, what to say, and looking like this." She gestured to her obvious pregnancy. "You'd act like yourself," David said simply. "That's all anyone expects." It took him 2 weeks to convince her, but eventually Rebecca agreed. She was so starved for human connection, so tired of hiding in her house, that even the prospect of being uncomfortable around strangers seemed better than continued isolation. The drive to the reservation took 40 minutes through rolling hills and wide open spaces that Rebecca had somehow never really noticed before. David pointed out landmarks, shared stories about his childhood adventures in those hills, painted a picture of a community she'd never imagined existed so close to her own world. "That's where my cousin lives," he'd say, pointing to a modest house with a large garden. "She grows the best corn in 3 counties. And that's where I learned to ride horses," he'd add, indicating a field where several beautiful animals grazed peacefully. Rebecca began to realize how small her world had really been. She'd spent 42 years living in the same town, but she'd only known one tiny slice of the larger community around her. The powwow was being held in a large field behind the community center. As they pulled into the grass parking area, Rebecca could hear drumming and singing, could smell food cooking, could see families setting up chairs and blankets for the celebration. Her anxiety spiked immediately. She was clearly the only white person in sight, obviously pregnant and wearing clothes that suddenly felt all wrong for the occasion. "David, I can't do this," she whispered as they walked toward the gathering. "Yes, you can," he said quietly. "Just breathe. These are good people." Elena Crowfeather spotted them before they'd gone 10 steps. She was a small woman with silver hair braided down her back, wearing a beautiful dress decorated with intricate beadwork. Her face was lined with age, but her eyes were sharp and kind. She walked directly to Rebecca, studying her face with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable but somehow wasn't. "So you're the woman who's captured my grandson's heart?" Elena said, her voice warm with gentle humor. "Yes, ma'am," Rebecca managed. "I'm Rebecca Martinez. Thank you for letting me come to your celebration." Elena smiled, an expression that transformed her entire face. "Any woman carrying a Crowfeather baby is family. Come, sit with me. I want to hear your story." Rebecca had expected questions about her background, her intentions, her fitness to be part of David's life. Instead, Elena asked about the pregnancy, about her health, about whether she was eating enough and sleeping well. "Babies change everything," Elena said as they settled onto folding chairs near the dancing area. "But they also show us what really matters." Other family members approached throughout the afternoon, introducing themselves with easy warmth. David's aunt brought Rebecca a plate of fry bread and stew. His cousin asked if she needed a more comfortable chair. Children played around her feet, completely unbothered by her presence. The acceptance was so natural, so unforced, that Rebecca found herself relaxing for the first time in months. No one asked probing questions about her relationship with David. No one made judgmental comments about unwed pregnancy. No one seemed to think her presence required explanation or apology. Maria Little Thunder, a woman about Rebecca's age with 4 children, sat down beside her during one of the dance performances. "David says you're having a rough time with your church community," Maria said quietly. Rebecca nodded, not trusting her voice. I'm sorry that happened to you, Maria continued. People can be cruel when they're scared of what they don't understand. I just don't know what I'm going to do, Rebecca admitted. I've lost everything I thought was important. Maria was quiet. For a moment, watching the dancers move in the center of the circle. My grandmother used to say that sometimes we have to lose our small dreams to make room for bigger ones. Rebecca wasn't sure what that meant, but something about Maria's calm confidence was comforting. As the afternoon wore on, Rebecca found herself drawn into conversations about children, about traditions, about the challenges of raising families in a world that often seemed hostile to their values. The women around her shared their own stories of struggle and adaptation, of finding strength in community when the outside world offered rejection. Elena approached again as the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Rebecca, she said, I want to tell you something important. In our tradition, we believe that every child chooses their parents before they're born. This baby chose you and David for good reasons. Don't let other people's fear make you doubt that choice. The words hit Rebecca with unexpected force. She'd been thinking of her pregnancy as a mistake, a complication that had ruined her carefully planned life. Elena was suggesting it might be a gift, a purpose she hadn't recognized. But I don't know how to be a mother, Rebecca whispered. I don't know how to do this alone. Who said anything about alone? Elena asked, gesturing around the gathering. You think all these children have just one mother? Children need communities, not just parents. And you're part of our community now, whether you knew it or not. As they drove home that evening, Rebecca felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. The Lakota community had offered her something her own church never had: acceptance. Without conditions, support without judgment, belonging without having to earn it through perfect behavior. Your grandmother is an amazing woman, Rebecca told David. She likes you, David replied. She told me you have a strong spirit, even if you've forgotten how to use it. Rebecca looked out at the darkening landscape, thinking about Elena's words. Maybe she had forgotten her own strength in all those years of trying to be what others expected. Maybe losing her old life wasn't the disaster. She'd thought it was. Maybe it was the beginning of discovering who she really could be. The contractions started at 3 in the morning on a Tuesday in late April. Rebecca woke up to a sharp pain across her lower back that felt different from the usual pregnancy aches she'd grown accustomed to. She lay still for a moment, hoping it was just another false alarm, but when the next wave hit 20 minutes later, she knew this was the real thing. Her first instinct was to call David, but she hesitated with her phone in her hand. It was so early and she wasn't completely sure yet. What if she was wrong? What if this was just another night of uncomfortable sleep? The third contraction made the decision for her. David, she whispered when he answered on the second ring. I think it's time. I'll be right there, he said, and she could hear him moving around, getting dressed. How far apart are they? About 20 minutes, but they're getting stronger. Okay, I'm leaving now. Just breathe through them, like we practiced. Rebecca hung up and tried to remember the breathing exercises from the childbirth classes they'd attended together in the next town over. She'd been the only unmarried woman in the class, and while the instructor had been professional, Rebecca had felt the curious stares from other couples who wondered about her story. Now, alone in her bedroom with labor pains building, those classes seemed like a lifetime ago. David arrived within 15 minutes. Letting himself in with the key she'd given him months earlier. He found her in the kitchen, leaning against the counter and breathing through another contraction. How are you doing? He asked, immediately moving to support her. Scared, she admitted, and excited and terrified. He rubbed her back gently. That sounds about right for having a baby. They'd planned to go to the regional hospital in Rapid City, about an hour's drive away. Rebecca had chosen it because it was far from her old community, where she wouldn't have to worry about running into people who might judge her situation. But as the contractions intensified and came closer together, that distance suddenly seemed problematic. David, I don't think we're going to make it to Rapid City, Rebecca said during a particularly strong contraction that left her breathless. David checked his watch. The contractions were now coming every 10 minutes and lasting longer each time. We could try for the Indian Health Service hospital, he suggested. It's only 20 minutes away. Rebecca had never considered that option. The IHS hospital served primarily the reservation community, and she'd assumed it wasn't meant for people like her. But as another wave of pain hit, she realized this wasn't the time for assumptions. Okay, she gasped. Let's go. The drive to the IHS hospital was the longest 20 minutes of Rebecca's life. David drove carefully but quickly, one hand on the steering wheel and one holding hers. The contractions were coming every 7 minutes now, and Rebecca found herself making sounds she'd never made before. "You're doing great," David kept saying. "We're almost there." When they arrived at the hospital, David helped Rebecca out of the truck just as another contraction hit. She doubled over, gripping his arm, unable to walk or speak until it passed. A nurse appeared with a wheelchair almost immediately. "How far apart are the contractions?" she asked, all business and efficiency. "About 5 minutes now," David replied. "First baby?" "Yes." "Okay, let's get you inside and see what's happening." The nurse, whose name tag read Patricia Charging Bear, was probably in her 40s with kind eyes and capable hands. She got Rebecca settled in a labor room and began checking her progress while asking questions about her pregnancy and medical history. "You're about 6 centimeters dilated," Patricia announced. "This baby is definitely coming today, probably within the next few hours." Rebecca felt a mixture of relief and terror. She was really going to become a mother today, whether she felt ready or not. "Is there anyone else you'd like us to call?" Patricia asked. "Family members who want to be here?" Rebecca's heart sank. Her own family lived across the country and had been less than supportive when she told them about the pregnancy. Her church family had made their position clear. She was facing the most important moment of her life with only David beside her. "Just us," she said quietly. Patricia nodded without judgment. "That's fine. Sometimes the people who matter most are the ones who show up when it counts." As Rebecca's labor progressed, she was amazed by the care she received. The hospital staff treated her with warmth and respect, never making her feel like an outsider. Despite being the only non-native patient she could see, Dr. Anna Lakota, the physician who would deliver her baby, explained everything that was happening and answered all her questions with patience and professionalism. "Your baby's heartbeat is strong and steady," Dr. Lakota told her during one of the regular checks. "Everything looks good." By early afternoon, Rebecca was exhausted but determined. The contractions were intense now, coming one after another with barely any break between them. David never left her side, holding her hand, offering ice chips, and reminding her to breathe when the pain seemed overwhelming. "I can't do this," Rebecca gasped during one particularly difficult moment. "It's too much." "Yes, you can," David said firmly. "You're the strongest person I know. This baby is lucky to have you as their mother." Patricia overheard and smiled. "He's right, you know. I've been doing this for 15 years, and I can tell when someone has the strength to be a good parent. You've got it." The encouragement from this woman she'd just met meant more to Rebecca than she could express. In her old life, she'd been surrounded by people who knew her history, her reputation, her position in the community. Here, she was valued simply for who she was in this moment, a woman bringing new life into the world. Elena Crowfeather arrived just as Rebecca was entering the final stage of labor. David had called her when they first got to the hospital, and she'd driven over as soon as she could. "How is she doing?" Elena asked Patricia quietly. "She's a fighter," Patricia replied, "strong and determined." Elena approached Rebecca's bedside just as another contraction was ending. "Hello, dear one," she said softly. "I came to welcome our baby into the world." Rebecca nearly cried at the word "our." In Elena's mind, this child already belonged to the extended family, was already loved and wanted and celebrated. "I'm so glad you're here," Rebecca managed to say. "Where else would I be?" Elena replied, taking Rebecca's free hand. "This is my great-grandchild being born today." When the moment finally came to push, Rebecca felt surrounded by strength that wasn't just her own. David held one hand while Elena held the other. Patricia coached her through each push while Dr. Lakota prepared to catch the baby. The room felt full of love and anticipation rather than medical sterility. "I can see the head," Dr. Lakota announced. "One more big push should do it." Rebecca gathered every ounce of strength she had left and pushed with everything in her. She felt the baby slip free, heard the immediate cry that meant healthy lungs, saw the tears in David's eyes as he looked at their child for the first time. "It's a boy," Dr. Lakota said, placing the baby on Rebecca's chest. "A beautiful, healthy boy." Rebecca looked down at her son, still slippery and red from birth, and felt her world shift completely. This tiny person had been growing inside her for 9 months, but seeing his face, feeling his weight against her chest, made him real in a way she hadn't expected. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I'm your mama." David leaned over to get a closer look at his son. "He's perfect," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Elena stood at the foot of the bed, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Welcome to the world, grandson," she said in Lakota, then in English. "You are blessed to have such brave parents." As the medical team cleaned up and completed their procedures, Rebecca realized something profound had happened beyond just giving birth. She'd entered this hospital feeling alone and uncertain about her future. She was leaving as part of a family that extended far beyond just her and David. Maria Little Thunder appeared in the doorway, holding a beautiful baby blanket with traditional beadwork. "I hope you don't mind the interruption," she said. "I wanted to bring this for the baby. You made this?" Rebecca asked, accepting the soft blanket. "My mother and I worked on it together," Maria replied. "Every baby should have something made with love to keep them warm." Patricia helped Rebecca wrap the baby in Maria's blanket, and Rebecca marveled at how perfectly he fit into this gift from people who barely knew her, but had claimed her as family anyway. "What's his name?" Elena asked. Rebecca and David had discussed names for months, but had never quite settled on one. Now, looking at their son surrounded by the love of his extended Lakota family, the answer seemed obvious. "Joshua David Martinez Crow." "Feather?" Rebecca said. "Joshua means God delivers, and I think God delivered him to exactly the right place." Elena smiled broadly. "Joshua is a good, strong name. He'll carry it well." As visiting hours wound down and the hospital grew quiet, Rebecca found herself alone with David and baby Joshua for the first time. The weight of what had changed hit her fully. "We're parents," she said, still hardly believing it. "We're a family," David corrected gently. Rebecca looked around the hospital room, thinking about all the people who had shown up to support them today. People who had no obligation to care about her or her baby, but had chosen to anyway. 1 year later, Rebecca barely recognized her own life. She sat on the front porch of the small house she now shared with David, watching 18-month-old Joshua chase butterflies in their front yard. His chubby legs carried him in wobbly circles, as he giggled at the colorful wings that stayed just out of his reach. "Mama, fly!" Joshua called out, pointing excitedly at a bright yellow butterfly that had landed on Elena's sunflower patch. "Yes, baby, that's a butterfly," Rebecca replied, marveling at how natural the word mama felt now. Even though it had terrified her just a year ago, the house they lived in sat on the edge of the reservation, close enough to be part of the community, but far enough from town to avoid the whispered conversations that had once made grocery shopping an ordeal. David had bought the property 2 years earlier with dreams of someday building his own home. Now those dreams included a family. Rebecca's days had settled into a rhythm she'd never imagined possible. 3 mornings a week she worked at the Tribal College Library, helping students research papers and organizing cultural archives. The job had started as temporary help, but had grown into something meaningful as Rebecca discovered her talent for connecting young people with resources they needed. "You have a gift for making people feel welcome," Dr. Jennifer Stans Tall, the college president, had told her during her 6-month review. "Students trust you in ways they don't trust everyone." The irony wasn't lost on Rebecca. She'd spent 15 years trying to make people feel welcome in a church that had ultimately rejected her. Now she was finding her calling in a completely different kind of sacred space. Joshua spent those mornings with Elena, who had insisted that watching her great-grandson was a privilege, not a burden. Rebecca would drop him off at Elena's house and find him there hours later, usually covered in flour from helping with baking or dirt from playing in the garden. "Grandma Elena teach me grow corn," Joshua announced one afternoon. Holding up a tiny seedling with pride, Elena smiled at Rebecca over Joshua's head. "He has good hands for growing things, patient hands." These moments filled Rebecca with gratitude she sometimes couldn't contain. Joshua was learning lessons about patience, respect for nature, and family responsibility that she never could have taught him alone. He was growing up surrounded by aunties and uncles and cousins, who weren't blood relatives but treated him like precious family anyway. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. Rebecca had to confront assumptions about native culture that she'd carried without realizing. She learned that much of what she'd thought she knew came from movies and textbooks rather than reality. "You have to unlearn some things to learn others," Maria Little Thunder had told her during one of their long conversations about raising children in two cultures. Rebecca took that advice seriously. She read books about Lakota history and traditions. She attended cultural events and asked questions when she didn't understand something. She learned basic phrases in Lakota and tried to understand the spiritual beliefs that guided David's family. "Why is this important to you?" David asked one evening as he found Rebecca studying a book about traditional ceremonies. "Because it's important to you," Rebecca replied, "and because Joshua deserves to know all parts of who he is." David had struggled with his own identity growing up, caught between reservation life and the expectations of the broader community. He wanted better for his son. "I want him to be proud of both sides of his heritage," David told Rebecca. "I want him to know he belongs everywhere, not nowhere." Rebecca understood that feeling now. For months after Joshua's birth, she had felt suspended between two worlds without fully belonging to either. Her old church community remained closed to her, but she wasn't sure she fit completely into the Lakota community either. The breakthrough came during Joshua's first birthday celebration. Elena had organized a traditional feast, and the entire extended family had gathered to welcome the little boy into his second year of life. Rebecca had spent days worrying about her role in the ceremony. Should she participate in traditions she didn't fully understand? Should she step back and let David's family take the lead? She felt caught between wanting to honor their customs and fear of doing something wrong. "Stop overthinking," Elena had told her the morning of the celebration. "You're Joshua's mother. That gives you a place in every ceremony, every tradition, every family gathering. Your heart is in the right place, and that's what matters." During the ceremony, Rebecca found herself naturally falling into the rhythm of the celebration. She helped serve food. She listened to the elders speak blessings over Joshua. She watched with pride as David carried their son around the circle while family members offered gifts and prayers for his future. When it came time for Rebecca to speak about her hopes for Joshua's life, she found words she didn't know she possessed. "I want him to know love without conditions," she said, looking around at the faces that had become family to her. "I want him to understand that home isn't about where you come from, but about where you're accepted for who you are." The murmurs of agreement that followed told Rebecca she'd said something that resonated with people who had their own experiences of finding belonging in unexpected places. After that day, Rebecca stopped questioning whether she truly belonged in this community. She realized that belonging wasn't something you earned through perfect behavior or cultural knowledge. It was something you received through showing up, caring about others, and being willing to learn and grow. Her relationship with David had deepened too. They'd gotten married in a small ceremony 6 months after Joshua's birth, officiated by a tribal elder who spoke about the sacred responsibility of creating new families. Rebecca wore a dress that Maria had helped her choose and Elena had braided traditional beads into her hair. "You're not the same person I met fixing that church," David told her on their wedding night. "Neither are you," Rebecca replied. "We're both better." The biggest test of Rebecca's new life came unexpectedly on a Tuesday afternoon in November. She was working at the library when Lisa Shung, her former friend from the church, walked through the doors, Rebecca's heart jumped into her throat. She hadn't spoken to Lisa in over a year, hadn't seen anyone from her old community since Joshua's birth. Lisa approached the reference desk hesitantly, clearly as nervous as Rebecca felt. "Hi, Rebecca," Lisa said quietly. "I hope it's okay that I came here." "Of course," Rebecca managed. "How are you, Lisa?" "I'm okay. I just I wanted to see how you were doing. I heard you had your baby, and I wanted to congratulate you." They talked for 20 minutes, careful conversation that danced around the hurt feelings and awkward history between them. Lisa admired photos of Joshua and asked polite questions about Rebecca's new job and life. "I miss you," Lisa said finally. "A lot of us do. We know we handled things badly." Rebecca felt a flicker of the old longing for her former community, but it was different now. She missed some of the people, but she didn't miss the constant worry about meeting expectations or the fear of making mistakes. "I miss parts of that life too," Rebecca said honestly. "But I'm happy now, Lisa, really happy." "I can see that," Lisa replied, and she sounded like she meant it. "You look peaceful." After Lisa left, Rebecca sat at her desk thinking about how much had changed. A year ago, Lisa's visit would have sent her into an emotional spiral, would have made her question everything about her new life. Now it felt like closure, like the final confirmation that she'd made the right choices. That evening, Rebecca told David about Lisa's visit while they watched Joshua play with blocks on the living room floor. "How do you feel about it?" David asked. "Grateful," Rebecca said after thinking about it. "Grateful that I found something better than what I lost." David reached over and took her hand. We both did. As winter settled over the reservation, Rebecca found herself looking forward to the future instead of mourning the past. Joshua was talking more every day, mixing English words with Lakota phrases he'd learned from Elena. David's construction business was growing, with more clients appreciating his attention to quality and cultural sensitivity. Rebecca had started taking evening classes at the tribal college, working toward a degree in Native American studies. She wanted to understand more deeply the history and culture that had embraced her and her son. "Why are you doing this?" a classmate asked during one of their study sessions. "You don't need a degree to work at the library." "I'm not doing it for the job," Rebecca replied. "I'm doing it to be a better mother, a better partner, a better member of this community." On quiet evenings, Rebecca would sit on her porch and think about the woman she'd been just 2 years earlier. That woman had measured her worth by how well she met other people's expectations, had built her identity around being indispensable to people, who ultimately found her disposable. Now she was learning to measure her worth by how well she loved the people who mattered most, how fully she embraced the life she'd been given, how bravely she faced each new challenge and opportunity. Joshua tottered over to where she sat, holding up a picture book about animals. "Read, Mama?" he asked, climbing into her lap. "Of course, sweetheart," she said, settling him against her. As she read about bears and rabbits and birds, Rebecca marveled at how